Welcome to Inquirer Live, everybody. I'm Jonathan Tannenwald, the Inquirer soccer beat reporter, here for a discussion about the Olympic soccer tournaments that have been going on for the last few weeks, and they've been pretty wild, as you all know. The United States losing in the semifinals to Canada in their quest to become the first reigning World Cup champion to win the following Olympics. They've come up short. They'll play for bronze instead of gold. The men's tournaments have also been quite entertaining. The final will be Brazil and Spain, two of the top teams in the field with a lot of stars that soccer fans around the world have heard of. Our guest for the show will be somebody who Philadelphia soccer fans know very well, former U.S. women's national team player Lori Lindsey. She played in the World Cup. She played professionally here in Philadelphia for the old Independents a decade ago. We might reminisce a little bit about that. And she has since then had a distinguished career already in broadcasting. She's been calling games at the Olympics for NBC. She calls National Women's Soccer League games for CBS. She's done a lot of MLS games all over the country. It'll be great to have her on. Before we bring her in, a quick housekeeping note. If you'd like to participate in today's discussion and send in questions, you can do so by in the comment section on the Inquirer Live page at Inquirer.com. Of course, if you're already there, it's the media. Go to Inquirer.com/USWS Live to submit your questions. And with that, here's Lori. You know, you work in television all the time. I don't, so I hope I got that right.
I thought that was excellent. Well done.
It is true that I have known Lori for as long as since she played for the Independents, which I cannot believe was a decade ago. The time has flown by.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has. And what got me reminiscing recently was the trade with Paul Riley and Amy Rodriguez from Kansas City to North Carolina, thinking about them being reunited. Two of my coach and then one of my teammates for the Philadelphia Independents, and then also watching Caroline Sager, who is also an integral part of that team, and she'll be playing in the gold medal match on Thursday for Sweden.
I was at the U.S.-Sweden game at the 2019 World Cup, and Caroline was walking through the mix zone after the game, and I stopped her down, and I said, "You might not remember who I am." She said, "Yeah, I do." So that was pretty cool. Yes, we will talk about the gold medal game.
Right. Look at you. Good job.
It's kind of wild how long I've been doing this for, you know. We will talk about the gold medal games in men's and women's soccer, but we will, of course, start by talking about the United States losing to Canada for the first time in 20 years. It was going to happen sooner or later, but that was some way for it to happen. The tournament, I think, didn't quite taste right for a lot of people. I think that's one of the best ways I could put it. The U.S. did not play at its best for most of the time. And Lori, as you reflect on what we've seen, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up really well. I don't think it's anything what any of us expected. You know, it is interesting because coming into this tournament, the only thing that I felt concerned about for this team was how long they had been together. It was the first team that was arriving in Japan. It was going to look very different, obviously, with the COVID restrictions and how much they'd be in lockdown. And even prior to that, they were together 2 weeks for those send-off matches versus Mexico, so they're in lockdown then. So my only concern was the time together and just what that environment looks like, and no, I guess, putting the onus on anybody. It was just the circumstances, right? And I was like, is this environment going to be stale? Are they going to be together too long? Because in general, when it comes to like World Cups and Olympics, there's a ton of energy. There's a ton of excitement. You can go out and enjoy the cities that you're playing in. You have your families come in to keep things fresh. And it's always is like about finding time away from the group, even the team that you love, because it's just about managing your emotions. And in these circumstances, I was like a little concerned that the U.S. team would almost be together too long and then in isolation as well. And how would that bode for their performances? And, you know, listen, I think that first game versus Sweden, a really tough matchup that we all knew was coming, but I think that, you know, took a lot out of them emotionally, mentally, and physically going into this tournament, and really hasn't been able to correct, I guess, so to speak, what that looked like. So, yes, I think perplexing to all of us. And, you know, just I think, who was it? Julie Foudy that said it. typically with this U.S. team, especially in 2019, when we've won the World Cup, even when we lost in 2011, again, 2015, any of the championships, right? I think the thing is there's a great joy and camaraderie within the team, and there's a fight on the field together, and there just seems to not be that for some reason. There seems to be a disconnect. So yeah, very, very odd tournament, and I feel for the players, and excited though to cheer them on again for the bronze on Thursday.
You mentioned the effect of the isolation, the pandemic, and all that, and you played at the 2011 World Cup in Germany, which, as countries to play a World Cup in, that's a pretty good one.
Oh yeah, it's amazing.
And look, when the Olympic rosters were expanded to 22, I think we all thought that's going to be the ace in the hole for the United States. Mm-hmm. Lynn Williams and Katarina Macario are going to play a lot, and that's what's going to carry the U.S. Over the line. They didn't play. I think Williams in particular didn't play as much as people expected. Macario didn't play much at all. Mm-hmm. I wonder, we all thought that the veterans on this team had one last big run in them, and maybe they didn't. I don't want to say Vlatko Ananovsky got it wrong per se, because we can get to that in a minute, and B, your and my Twitter mentions have been full of people yelling at us over the last couple of days on that very subject. But did anything of what we saw on the field surprise you? And from the U.S. side?
Yeah, actually. And when I say surprised, maybe I'm not totally surprised, because I think the way that the team has prepared is what we're getting. And I'm not blaming anyone, but I think we prepared extensively, at least it seemed to me, for teams that were going to sit back, as we saw in 2016 when Sweden beat us by sitting in a low block defensively, made it very difficult to break down. We saw a little bit of that against Canada, the other game as well. But for most part, a lot of these teams have come out in this tournament and have high pressed. We saw that in the first game. And that's what shocked the U.S. We could not figure it out. It wasn't even, the mentality of the U.S. is about putting teams under pressure, especially this team. They've, really gone after teams to figure out, okay, if they're going to sit back, what does that look like? How can we draw them out and then go after them again? And we saw that against a lot of teams that they played coming into this Olympics. However, when Sweden did the opposite, quite frankly, in the opening game, it felt like the team was shell-shocked, didn't know exactly how to handle that. And I think that's where there has been some surprises. It is, I feel like being a midfielder, and in particular, a lot of the stuff stems in that midfield. We have, we've talked about Julie Ertz and what she's meant to in terms of missing in that initial game and coming off the bench. Was she going to be okay to play? Lindsey Horan playing in that number 6 position. Prior to that, not really having any sort of answers. But really in the midfield is where I've had a lot of questions, and there's been a lot of surprise for me, because there hasn't been a rhythm. So for a team that wants to press, they want to attack, they want to get on the front foot, I feel like we have been out of sorts in the midfield. We can't get on the ball. The team is too stretched. We have, whether it's Julie Ertz or Lindsey Horan, they've been isolated. It's too much work for them. The other two midfielders have gone missing. At times, I feel like it looks like we're playing a 4-1-6. And teams that can, Sweden, Canada, even everybody in our group, Australia, and, I say this with a lot of respect, I think New Zealand didn't have a ton of time to prepare, obviously coming right in and having to jump into games. So maybe not them as much, but teams that can match us physically for 90 minutes and can play and tactically want to play through the midfield. That's been really difficult for us, and even Canada in that regard, who I think, as we noticed, only had that one opportunity, which ended up being in the penalty kick. So, it's been surprising in terms of I feel like a real lack of rhythm and how to get ourselves into the game. And then once we do start getting on the ball, being able to have that end product, which is unfortunate and not very common for the U.S. team.
It's funny you mentioned Horan and Ertz. Sam Mewis, there were some stretches where I was quite surprised. Mm-hmm. I mean, she's a player who I think is one of the very best on this team, and there were stretches when she was not connecting passes. She wasn't getting into positions to take those 20-yard shots that she can hit and knock somebody over or put the ball in the net,
Mm-hmm.
But I look at, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I'll say some of that too. It's interesting and I talk about this because of the evolution of kind of what I think of as the midfield. And, for Sam, even in 2019, we would see her drop deeper, collect the ball. She would play the 30-yard ball to switch the point. We don't see any of that, right? Like we see a lot more forward passes, forward rush passes. And I'm not specifically just talking about Sam. So it's interesting just the kind of the evolution of maybe what the emphasis has been in terms of the roles in the midfield. And I think, once you sometimes get in those mindsets, and I'm just speculating going off of what I've seen and calling some of the games, but it is just interesting to see the progression or what has been asked of players, and then how what I feel parts of the game have changed, because we don't see that from Sam really anymore. Playing some big switches, linking play. It's a lot more attacking minded. Get herself into the box, and not as much in the buildup, in my opinion.
So looking forward now, there's the bronze medal game coming against Australia. You have to think that if there was any game that the U.S. would really go out guns blazing as, it would be this one, because they want to win a medal.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Australia is going to try to do the same. They're going for the first medal in their history, and they are hosting the World Cup in 23, and these two teams know each other about as well as any two teams can because of the number of Australian players that have played in the NWSL over the years. Obviously, all eyes in that regard are going to be on Sam Kerr. But I want to ask about what happens after that, because we are coming up on a major generational change in this U.S. program. And everybody knew it was going to come after the Olympics. If the Olympics had happened on schedule, it would have happened a year ago instead of now. And maybe that's a factor in some of what we've seen over the last few weeks, by the way, in terms of everybody being a year older. How big do you expect that I mean, we think we know who some of the names are. Megan Rapinoe, Carly Lloyd, Becky Sauerbrunn. I don't want to speak for any of them. Obviously, if I speak for Carly, I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for it. It wouldn't be the first time. But how big do you expect this generational change to be? Because it has the potential to be quite big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think, one of the reasons why it feels so big too is because the fact that these players have had not only on the field, but off the field as well. So I think it feels even more monumentous in that regard. Because, not too long, last cycle, we had Abby Wambach, we had Christy Rampone, same people, right? I think it's just like where we are and how much the sport has grown and what these players have meant to the program and their longevity. But I expect, I don't want to speak for any of those players either. That's a personal choice. That is a conversation that you have with Flacco, the coach, or, just the organization in general. And so what the next steps are. But I think everyone would agree that we're coming to a point where, yes, it's the natural flow and evolution of the cycles that we're going to need to start bringing in fresher faces and getting younger experience. And it is a quick turnaround now because we've lost a year essentially with Olympics being pushed back. So that cycle has to be quick. And that's why the professional league is so important in the WSL, because it does provide that time, that playing environment, because even though we have a couple of years till the World Cup, we have qualifiers before that. So things start to move. So I do feel, though, we're going to have to start getting some more players time and experience in the environment for sure.
Here's a stat for folks to think about, sort of
Can't wait.
Embracing the context of this era of players. There were 6 major tournament finals from 2008 to 2019, counting the World Cup and the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. made 5 of them and won 4 of them. That is an outrageous run of success.
Yeah.
And obviously the standards in the U.S. are really high.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, and I think that is, thank you for putting that stat out there, because it's also something that needs to be kept in perspective, right? I think there's like, I'll talk all day. Like a lot of these players still really good friends of mine. And I really care about them. I understand the pressures and the extent of the work behind the scenes that goes into making a US team, let alone then playing and performing and competing. And I think we're exactly seeing why it's so difficult, even though there's been a year gap, so difficult to win back to back. The emotional toll it took to even win the 2019, right? Becky Sauerbrunns talked about it, getting an ulcer after the 2019 World Cup. So and I only laugh because it's serious, right? Like
Right.
that is,
Right. Yeah.
it sounds wild, but it is true. There's a lot of pressure, and it's an emotional toll. So yeah, I think this is why we're seeing it so difficult, and also why there's so much conversation around like whether or not the team has succeeded. Listen, they have not played good soccer by anybody's standards, by their standards, by fan standards. Whoever wants to talk about women's soccer and soccer in general, no one will say this is the best performance we've ever seen. But the reality is they're still playing for bronze. So this is like not great, right? And they're still competing for a medal, which I think sets this, that's the conversation right there. Like this team is still finding ways to figure out how to get it done. Hasn't been pretty. They lost against Canada. That wasn't, didn't take their chances. There weren't many either. And yet they're still finding themselves playing against Australia. And 3 of the teams came from our group, right? So.
And the bronze medal game, by the way, is Thursday at 4 a.m. Eastern time. I know folks are sick of waking up at 4 in the morning. I am as sick of it as anybody.
Side note, listen, I was up as a fan yesterday morning, and I'm like, credit to everybody that's been waking up. This is much harder than getting up to call games, because for calling games, you're jazzed up, you have all your information, you're ready to go. I mean, as a fan, I was like, this is challenging.
The TV audiences for games that have been at 4 in the morning have been just outrageously high.
Yeah,
they're rivaling what NBC gets for the Premier League at hours when nobody rationally, especially in August, ought to be awake.
Yeah.
I want to ask, also in terms of looking forward, and we mentioned that there's this generation of players that is, going to move on here. And I want you to put your NWSL analyst for CBS hat on here for a moment. And let's talk about some of the players who are coming over the horizon. And there is no, for countries like England and Australia and France and Germany, they know that they're not going to sit here and rest on their laurels and be happy, because there's a load of young American players who are going to step in here and potentially be really good. I think about Sophia Smith in Portland, Andy Sullivan in Washington, who in an alternate universe where she doesn't get injured might be on this team as Julie Ertz's backup. Katarina Macario obviously is already there. Brianna Pinto at Gotham FC, who's starting to make her mark. And a lot of others who are in the NWSL or who are about to be in the NWSL who are really good. And I wonder who are a few names who you think people ought to watch for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you covered quite a few there. I'd also continue to add Mal Pugh to the mix. I think getting herself healthy and back into a regular rhythm of games has proven to be an important role outside of the own goals. That's a little joke for if you watch the NWSL for Chicago.
Just a bit.
And but Sophia Smith continues to perform. Who else has been on my mind? It's be curious to see Midge Purse back into the mix, what that looks like, and actually find a position that suits her. She's playing obviously up top for Gotham right now, but I think more suited potentially for the U.S. as a right back position. And then
here for an hour on that one, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Alana Cook.
Yes.
Back in the mix as well. I would like to see that. So, a ton of talent. And again, it's just about getting them into that mix, because those players in particular, when I think of like an Andy Sullivan and you mentioning a backup Julie Ertz, completely different player though. So I think it looks different to how you're going to play, what the tactics look like, and to who who fits into that system. Because I mean, we could go, Jonathan, you and I can go on this about this for a long, long time, but Catarina Macario comes to mind in that regard, and unbelievable talent, right? Can be one of the best. Yet, like when she performs, in my opinion, with the U.S., non-existent, right? And so it's like, what the question is does she fit into the mix of like how the U.S. is currently playing, or do we need to start to evolve on what that looks like and not lose what has made this team so special, but also how do you fit in somebody like a Catarina Macario then? Because, or is it just the conversation that she needs more time at that level? Right. So,
and you know, I think once some of the veteran players move on, there'll be a lot more playing time for her. I will plug, by the way, the next big event on the women's soccer calendar is the Women's International Champions Cup later this month in Portland. That Smith will be playing in for the Portland Thorns. Macario will be playing in for her club team, Lyon from France. I know you'll be out there calling some of the games. It's the Thorns, Lyon, Barcelona, and the Houston Dash. The last 2 trophy winners in the NWSL and the last 2 UEFA Women's Champions League winners. That's going to be a lot of fun. Y'all should tune in for that. Before we get to questions from the audience, let us take a look at the 2 gold medal games that are coming up. And I say both because you have been calling some of the men's games in this tournament too. We'll start with the women's game, Sweden, Canada. I think Sweden's the favorite. I think they've shown that they're the class team of the tournament so far. And I wonder if they win the gold, should we start talking about them the way we do France, Germany, and England?
That's an interesting question. I like that question a lot. And yes, in a lot of ways, I think they have been in that category, but also in a way that's like not as much in terms of their attacking prowess. And I think that's been the biggest change in this tournament. We're typically have thought of Sweden as, a team that's difficult to break down and then can get it done and execute when needed in the attack. But I think this is a team that has brought an extra layer and has brought an attack that's more exciting and has a variety in terms of being able to execute in set pieces, but also just in the flow of the game as well. So yeah, I think they've typically have been in that conversation, but this just evolves it in a different way. And, I think that there's going to be a continuing of a player pool that's more in depth and excitement for the Swedish side that we haven't seen from them in a while, right? I think they're finding excitement in this, like, let's attack, let's go after it. I agree about them being the favorites as well. And we'll see, because, Canada, a ton of pride there. We're difficult to break down, and can hurt you in some different ways going forward.
I was going to say that Canada is showing now that they are not just about Christine Sinclair anymore, and that, I think, as great as she is, as legendary as she is, the most important thing for Canada is that they now have a real depth of talent that they can play with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the one thing that's done or has gone really well for them is, and I say this in kind of in context with the U.S., there obviously is a ton of pressure on the U.S. team to win, right? And that's what this team has been built on, is continuing to win, fighting through adversity, and maybe not as much pressure on Canada. So they have done a good job, in my opinion, of bringing in youth and integrating them a lot earlier into some of these into these tournaments. And so it's helped them with the development, building out that player pool and getting them experience a lot earlier, because they're also going to have quite a bit of a turnover. I would imagine Dee Scott, this is her last tournament, Sinclair. So there's going to be some LeBay, I would imagine, potentially, even though they'll have Kaylin Sheridan coming in right after. But there's going to be some turnover in terms of some of the players that have been key for them throughout the last decade as well.
And the Gotham FC fans who are out there who are watching are very happy that Kaylin Sheridan's time is finally going to be here to be Canada's number one. Let's talk about the men's gold medal game. Brazil-Spain has the potential to be really spectacular, I think. What are you seeing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, 2 greats in the world of men's soccer in general. And if, for those that don't know or maybe do know that are listening to this, that it is a U23 event. So it was 3 overage players. But I would say 2 of the best. I mean, listen, I haven't seen Spain a ton. I saw one of their games, and Brazil was in the bracket of that I was calling majority of the games with Ivory Coast, Saudi Arabia, and Germany. So Brazil, Richarlison, the Everton striker, has been on fire this tournament. But listen, Spain, some, two different styles of play, I
Yes.
would say. So
Yes.
it's going to be, it'll be interesting. I very much feel like there'll be some back and forth, some ebbs and flows to the game. And it's like any final, right? It's who can manage the emotions, execute on the smallest details, and start to take over in the time that's needed. So, I mean, that's going to be the same with the Sweden-Canada game as well.
The men's final might not be high scoring. I'm a little worried because Spain is not a team that always posts a lot of goals, but the technical quality of the soccer, especially a guy like Pedri who plays for Barcelona, is going to be through the roof in this game.
Oh, totally. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's going to be by committee, and it has been for Spain. I mean, not a true out-and-out number 9 for them in this tournament. Yet, I mean, listen, there's going to be so much passing and so much commitment to keep the ball. We'll see how Brazil handles that, actually, because they've been susceptible to conceding some goals. So,
all right, let's take some questions from the audience. We already have one in. And again, if you're watching on social media, you can go to inquirer.com/USWS live to send in questions. And of course, if you're already watching on inquirer.com, you can put your questions in the box. Okay, the first question. There's been a lot of conversation this year for obvious reasons about athletes and mental health. And we saw, by the way, Simone Biles returning to action this morning, U.S. time, this evening over there, which was great to see in the gymnastics. Can you talk more about how mental health may affect a team dynamic versus athletes who participate in an individual sport?
Yeah, I mean, listen, like it's you're not only taking care of yourself, but you're also taking care of, you're a part of a team, and you're expected to help take care of that whole as well. So very much the same. I mean, at this level, there's also an understanding of like yourself as an athlete and like what you need to do individually to help prepare and be ready. But it's challenging, and it's challenging when, again, the things that I said at the beginning of this conversation, Jonathan, which is really about, different components. There is a lot of, when we're specifically talking about the U.S., there is a lot of pressure on this U.S. team. I mean, listen, the stuff that's going on off the field for equal pay, what it means to, if you don't play well. I mean, look at all the conversations we're having. Is there joy in this team? What do they do? They're not playing. Should Vlatko be fired? Should this? And it's just like, it's outrageous. It's also exciting because that's where the conversations are going in terms of the growth of the sport. But the mental health is extremely real when it comes to not only, as we've seen with Simone Biles, but also the health of a team. And it's not that one person will have an extreme impact, because this team would be also chosen from the coaching staff on the camaraderie aspect as well, who brings the best out of one another. But that doesn't always mean that, like, in times of adversity, it's easy to get out of situations that are difficult. And I'm not like minimizing difficult situations being mental health, but
you mentioned all the noise that always gets generated around this team, and for me, and you've known me for a long time, obviously, that's one of the highest compliments I can pay this team, is that it's pro sports, and we should talk about it like it's a pro sports team.
Yeah,
and give it the attention that it deserves, like a pro sports team. And sometimes that means criticism, and sometimes that means a lot of squawking on social media and whatnot, but that's further proof, I think, that has been demonstrated of the scale of interest in this team and in this sport. It keeps growing. You mentioned the equal pay subject. We have a question from the audience about where we are on equal pay for women and men in the sport of soccer. I'm going to answer that first because Lori has, over the years, in addition to her playing career and being part of the U.S. Women's Players Union, been on the U.S. Soccer Federation's board of directors through the Athlete Council. Folks need to know that before I put it to her. I think anybody watching this knows what I'm going to say. They certainly know at U.S. Soccer because they've seen me write it enough that we are not there yet. And no, these players do not earn the money that they have. They do not make the money that they have earned over the years. They do not make the money that has been, look, used to get the questions from people all the time, but they don't generate enough revenue as the men do. Well, the Wall Street Journal during the 2019 World Cup, went out and proved that the U.S. women's team was generating more revenue for U.S. soccer than the men were. Now, the men stunk at that point. We all know that. The men have come out and said recently, the Men's Players Union came out and said just a few days ago in a legal filing in one of the equal pay lawsuits that the U.S. women have not been paid enough. They deserve to be paid more. And in fact, on the pure merits of pay scales, they probably should have gotten paid more than what the men were getting paid. Now, the structures are different. We know that. Some of the women's players have their salaries paid through U.S. soccer. There are questions about benefits, questions about match fees, questions about bonuses, questions about whether the U.S. Soccer Federation can afford $60 million in back pay that the players' lawyers want in terms of FIFA prize money and all this other stuff. We could go on for an hour about that, I realize. And now, Lori, I will let you say what you want to. Again, disclaiming, you've been on the U.S. Soccer Board. I don't want to get you in trouble with either side's lawyers, but the floor is yours to say what you want to say about it.
Oh, yeah, you're not going to get me in trouble because I have been sworn to secrecy on that. But, I think you've said it just in general, like until there's like equal coverage, right? Until there's the equal pay and just as in general, right? Then we are not there yet. Until salaries and coverage and support and continuing, like really just understanding, right? And caring essentially is how I would say it, then we're not there yet. And in regards to this question, even more specifically, the fact that you haven't heard anything in the news about whether or not the CBAs are finished or whatever, we're not there yet then in terms of the specific numbers. So, yeah.
And I'll say one other thing too. The National Women's Soccer League has a role to play in this. It's not the role that the lawyers play. It's not the role that the judges play. It's not the role that Cindy Cohn, who's the president of U.S. Soccer, plays either, or anybody else who's involved in the collective bargaining or the lawsuits or whatever. The reason why U.S. Soccer has paid salaries to women's national teams players over the years is because in women's club soccer, there has not traditionally been enough money in U.S. leagues to pay market value salaries to pro women's players. That is slowly starting to change. Mm-hmm. I would like it. I'm sure we all would like it to change a little bit faster, especially with the NWSL next year going into its 10th year. And the incumbency is on the owners of teams who have the money to be willing to pay for salaries that are that high. Mm-hmm. And not just for the stars, by the way, but all the way across the board in the league, because we are seeing European teams paying higher salaries now than what NWSL teams are paying. And eventually that impacts both the foreign players who are deciding whether or not they want to play in the U.S. and the U.S. players who are deciding whether or not they want to play abroad, as you did in Australia, if my memory's right, mm-hmm. back in the day. So that's another piece of the puzzle to put in there. Again, folks, feel free to submit questions through the chat box here on the page. While we have a minute, I mentioned at the top of the show, and Lori and I discussed for a moment, that she used to play here in Philadelphia. Am I allowed to say that you still make your home here in Philadelphia?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
It's the number of us, as does, by the way, your NBC and CBS colleague, Marissa Pillow, who's over in Tokyo as the sideline reporter.
Yeah. She's like 5 blocks down the street.
It's awesome. People think this is not a great soccer town, and they should come here because they're wrong. It's a fabulous soccer town.
Oh, totally. What are the when the Premier League, they show like the highest viewerships? Yeah. Philadelphia is like always one of the top.
And there are any number of bars around town that you can go to. I'm not going to plug them here because I'm not going to give them free advertising on our site, but they know what they are. There are any number of bars around town that you can go to, whether it is the Premier League, the German Bundesliga, Italy's Serie A. For gosh sake, if you're an Italian soccer fan in this town, I think you already know where to go. But it's not that hard because they're all over the place. But I want to mention about whether or not this Philadelphia, you think ought to have an NWSL team. Obviously, the biggest piece is whether somebody out there is going to write a big enough check, to pay for an expansion fee and pay for a team and all that. But what's your sense of that?
Oh, yeah. I was just actually, when we were in Connecticut for the Olympics, because that's where the NBC studios are, a bunch of us went over to Lisa Baird's home, the the NWSL commissioner, and I was like, plug in Philadelphia as an expansion team. So, yeah, for sure. And also, I'm hearing like some rumors maybe about a WNBA franchise as well. So I'm like, let's bring them all here. Yes, and this is a terrific sport town in general. And then I think, as you mentioned, Jonathan, like a hidden gem for soccer as well. And the Philadelphia Union obviously been one of the top of the table and doing well under Jim Curtin.
We'll say there are 3 kids in the Aronson family. Brendan, who obviously played here already and is now over in Austria. Paxton, who's just starting his pro career. And they've got a sister who I've heard is pretty good too. And it would be great if she had a team to play for here in Philadelphia down the road.
Yeah, I'm recruiting her already. Let's go.
I know the commissioner, Lisa Baird, follows me on Twitter, but if you have a more direct line to her, as it seems that you do.
I don't really. I mean, listen, I was just invited to a dinner, so I was like, I'm going.
I don't think we have a ton of questions left in the chat. We might wrap this up a little early. Lori, it is great to reconnect with you. I should make the walk. That's what, a mile and a half from me down Broad Street. I should, it's not that far, but it's been too long since we've seen each other in person. Thanks for coming on. Continued success for you and all the stuff that you're doing with CBS, calling the NWSL, and say hi to Mike Watts for me when you get a chance.
Watts,
who's your play-by-play partner on a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for coming on. Everybody, thanks for watching here on Inquirer Live. And you can follow me on Twitter at The Goalkeeper, of course. It's right there on the screen, so that's pretty obvious. My work's at inquirer.com/soccer. Lori, give the folks your social media handle so they can follow you.
Yeah, Lori Lindsey 6, so LINDSEY 6, Twitter, and I guess Instagram, but I don't know if anybody on here is going to be on Instagram. But anyway, Twitter, Lori Lindsey 6. Follow me, connect.
Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching here on Inquirer Live, and we'll talk to you next time.